Hello and welcome back to the Ruy Lopez Masterclass. Today we are taking a look at this move here. This is known as the Old Steinitz defense of the Ruy Lopez. This is going to be chapter 2 of the Masterclass, and it is in the starting position, black playing the immediate 3d6. Now, this is not very popular nowadays. Most players, if they're going to play for d6, they're going to first throw in a6 and then go d6, and here black has better chances, and this will be the next chapter. But today we still need to cover this one, because it is still played occasionally, and we need to know how to punish it, because they're playing very passively, and if we do the same and we don't go for our chances, then we're actually going to be able to allow black a very fine game. So what do we do here? We instantly strike with a d4. This is sort of our prescription against all of their sidelines, whether they play the d6 sideline or the Smyslov or the Kozio or the classical, which was the previous chapter. We're trying to play c3 if necessary and ultimately d4, and we do that here. Now, against most variations, after we play our first move, there's a big branching point, and black can decide how they want to set up their pieces. But the truth is here, because black is in such a passive state, and we're going for such an aggressive move d4, there's really a very narrow path that they have to walk. So there's only really one way for them to continue. There's a couple different move orders, though, that they can use to reach that one way. So generally speaking, their knight has to come to f6, and their bishop, sooner rather than later, needs to come to d7 to address the elephant in the room, which is, of course, the weakened diagonal pointing towards the king, enabling ideas like d5. So those are the moves that they're going to have to make, and at some point, they're also going to have to release the tension by taking our pawn, because essentially we're going to add so much pressure that eventually we're going to threaten to take their pawn, and so again, sooner rather than later, they're going to release the tension. So in summary, they have essentially these three moves. Two of them are developing moves with the knight and the bishop, and one is to capture on d4, and they're going to have to throw in these moves, but they can do so in different move orders. So that's the only kind of careful thing to take notice of, and I'll walk you through this very slowly. So in the first move, after we play d4, they cannot move knight f6 because this does not address the immediate threat, an issue of the pinned knight, and we can simply win a pawn by taking on e5. We're already much, much better. They have to play one of the other two moves, either bishop d7 to pin the knight. This is what I will sort of label the main line, because if they take here, note that this will not lead to any independent value. We're going to take with the knight, and here, because of the tension on the knight, they're going to have to play bishop d7, and this is simply going to transpose. So remember, they can choose to take the pawn first, but then we simply take back with the knight, and then they have to play bishop d7, and we get to a transposition. So we're going to look at bishop d7 as sort of the line that the theory will stem from, but again, they could insert this pawn move first. We play knight c3. This is an important move to remember, and here again, they can transpose by taking. We're going to take, and we reach this position here, and this is one of the key positions to note. I will step very briefly one moment backwards, and after knight c3, they're not required to take. They can also play knight f6. This is sort of the third move. If they want to first develop the bishop, then they can move the knight, and no longer can we take a free pawn in the center, but what we can do is simply take over here on c6, and we're removing the pawn, and they have to really do something specific. If they take with the bishop, we can play simply queen e2. Notice if they take with the pawn, we actually just take that pawn. Indeed, it's a free one. If they take with the bishop, they're counterattacking our pawn, so we step away with queen e2, and now they have to release the tension because the pawn is under threat on e5, so they will have to take. And remember this position, because this again is a transposition. Okay, we're going to reach this through a different move order very soon after bishop e7, bishop to e3. This is precisely what we're going to see momentarily. So again, there are some move order tricks here to take note of, but the main line that I'm going to give is them taking first on d4 and then playing knight f6, okay? And this is sort of the main position, and here what we do is take on c6, and now you can start to see why we are transposing, because if they take with the bishop, we go queen e2, and we just saw this position literally a minute ago from a different move order. So there is some trickery to be careful of relating to bishop d7 or knight f6 or taking the pawn in different move orders, but we're going to reach essentially two types of positions. either positions where they take on c6, because eventually we are going to take the knight on c6 with our bishop in these lines. So either they're going to take with the bishop or they're going to take with the pawn. And again, these can be, happen in different move orders, but the resulting positions are identical. If they take with the bishop, you're going to get this position here. Okay, what's our game plan in this position? Let's start with these lines, them taking on c6 with the bishop. Okay, in these positions, the thing to take notice of is that we have central control, and this enables us to very quickly play for f3, g4, h4, and use our center as a launching pad, essentially, to generate an attack on the king side. Okay, we have a superior center, so we're going to transform that into a very energetic playing style towards the king side. And what this means is we don't want our king on that side of the board. We want to bring our king to the queen side and then free our hand, essentially, to attack them endlessly. So what we play here, okay, they're going to first develop their bishop. They kind of have to do this. And here we can play bishop e3, and our setup, very typical in sort of Sicilian setups, and you're going to see we get very similar to Sicilian structures. We're going to play bishop e3, pawn to f3, castle long, and then just start throwing our pawns. And man, this is a really fun line. So we can start with bishop e3. There's nothing wrong with starting with f3 either. This is sort of a more safe option. We secure the center, then go bishop e3, but note that we can play bishop e3 and after they castle, then go f3, because they cannot take this pawn right here. It loses for tactical reasons. So actually, if you want to be sneaky, you know that you're going to play f3 next, you can start with bishop e3, pretend that you blunder the pawn, and note sort of the way to punish them if they take, and I'll quickly show that. If they take with the knight, first of all, we get rid of their defender, we take the bishop. They can take the knight on c3, the line continues a little further, but in the end of the complications, we are much, much better, specifically because the knight on e2 is actually trapped. That's the key point. And if we go back, they can also take the pawn with the bishop, and here it's a little bit more tricky, but we play knight f5. This is the key move to remember, and the knight is just a very flimsy piece. Queen g4 is on the horizon. If they castle, for example, queen g4 comes, game over. There's a threat on g7, there's the threat on the knight. And if they play g6 to try to question our knight immediately, then bishop d4, and they've weakened their diagonal. And again, you can explore these lines just a little bit further, but the complications work out in our favor. In fact, if they take the pawn either way, we're already winning according to the engine. So they can't take the pawn, they have to castle, and now we transpose, we play f3. So you can choose which move order, either bishop e3 first or f3, doesn't really matter. We're going to get these same positions where we castle long, and they don't. And again, what this means is that we're going to go for the kingside attack, and we have to be careful, and we have to note that their attack is coming as well. So I have one game I want to show you, and you can see that our attack is a little bit easier to play off, and I think part of this is because, again, the center on e4 and the pawn on f3 make it very easy for us to just continue with g4, h4. This is the natural continuation of our extra space towards that side of the board, right? Our king side is extremely ambitiously placed. The pawns on e4 and f3 allow for this expansion. Meanwhile, for them, the pawn on d6 doesn't enable the same level of energy. C5 here weakens this pawn in the center tremendously, and in fact, we can switch our play then and our focus towards that center pawn. Okay, so they can play bishop e6. This is, again, a game following, so we're definitely outside of the bounds of theory, and eventually in the game, black did manage to start pushing their pawns because they have to, so b4 here, but it's a little too little and a little too late, and white has enough. Okay, you want to be careful here because black's attack is something to take note of, but if you're careful enough, then you're fine. And after queen c4, this is the critical moment. White actually messed up here. They played queen f1. They're not worse necessarily here, and in fact, I believe they ended up still winning the game very soon, and it's because the king side for black is just so much harder to keep under control, essentially, and indeed here, black resigned. Their king is completely open, and the rook and queen combined with the knight are going to make a point out of this king here. But I will go back to that critical moment. Just if you're curious, queen f1 was the mistake. h6. No reason to wait around. The attack here looks dangerous, but black is actually unable to generate anything concrete, and the h-file is opening up, and white's going to be able to deliver a final blow soon. So sort of a game that you don't necessarily need to know, but I think it makes the point, and a very strong point, that white's attack is much stronger in these positions, and I think that again, is a natural conclusion just from the fact that white has such a stronger center, which enables such expansion. So these are one type of positions that you need to know. Again, I'll back up for a second. Essentially, these positions occur when black develops everything. They eventually take quite early on. They put their knight here, we take, and they take back with the bishop, right? They have two choices. If they take with the bishop, we go queen e2, and we get this long castle position where we attack on the king side. That's position number one, sort of the first area that you want to have some understanding if you want to play against these lines. The second position is them taking with the pawn here. And I think that this is a little bit more fun. Even though in the last position we got this massive attack, here we can already try to go for something even more direct, queen f3. And the truth is, black has to be extremely careful here to not already find themselves in a very dangerous position. So there's two sort of natural moves. Bishop e7 makes a lot of sense. You want to develop, you want to castle, but here this allows a very cute blow, e5. And yeah, white's position is just extremely strong. Their pieces are optimally set up to attack the undeveloped king in the center. And it's true that white's king is left here, but you can afford sort of temporarily leaving the king there. And I think this comes back already from that third move that black played, which is d6. It's so passive that both players simply developing, white's going to develop to more active squares, and this is the continuation from that. You see this on the board. If they take the pawn, then you can take on c6, and this is very good for white. And there's not a whole lot more that they can do. You're going to win something here. If they move the knight, for example, you can take on c6 anyways, and then take back the knight, and here you can also go for this long castle idea, and you're in great shape. So bishop e7, for that reason, is not very precise because it allows this e5 move. c5 might seem like a better try because you're kicking away the knight, and okay, if the knight moves somewhere passively, then, you know, bishop e7 could come and black can finally get their king to safety, but the knight unfortunately finds itself on this beautiful post on f5, and from here, it really cannot be kicked away easily, right? The knight is very much dominating the position, so the bishop cannot move, for example, because there's going to be issues with the pawn on g7. So black, you know, at some point will probably need to chop this one off, but here we can even take with the pawn, not even with the queen. We're not worried about these pawns being doubled because all this allows is, again, so much space on the king side. Imagine the prospect of getting g4, g5 here. You know, they can finally claim, yes, we're castling, but okay, that's only castling into danger, right? We're going to develop the bishop at some point, castle, just so our king is a little safe, and then the attack again plays itself. Now, right before we end the video, a final variation that I should just kind of add to the end of this video because I think it is useful to see, and maybe you'll get this in some of your games. After we go d4, as a reminder, bishop d7 is the main move. They can take, but that is simply a transposition. And here, what if after they take, they don't go knight f6, which gave us kind of the two main lines that we just saw, them taking either with the pawn or the bishop. But what if instead they actually just take our knight in the center here on d4? Well, here's the main point to remember, and if you remember this, you're going to have a very good game. Take on d7 first, force them to move their queen, and then put your queen in a dominant post in the center, paired with the dominant pawn on the e-file, will allow us again to generate the kingside attack, and you're going to get a very similar position to what we just saw. So bishop f4, and then we castle long, and again, it's that attack that just plays itself. I mean, look at just how dominant this position is. There is one game to show here, and white is totally winning here. They played bishop g3, which is actually not a good move. d7 here, totally crushing. If the knight moves, then there's bishop takes c7. The rook here is very much a problem piece on d8. So in summary, I'm just going to quickly, if you've just watched the video, here's kind of a reminder of everything you just saw. There are essentially three paths that black can choose. They can focus on development in this position, which is kind of the core position of the entire variation. They can focus on development and play knight f6, and then we take. And if they take with the pawn, we play queen f3, and we get these attacks. If they take with the bishop, we play queen e2, and we also get the attacks. And alternatively, instead of developing the knight, they can take first our knight, but then again, we develop the queen after they take, and we get the attacks. So in all three positions, we have very much the same essence to it from the white side. We're going to develop this bishop eventually either to g5 or f4, or maybe e3, then we're going to castle long, and then we're going to be able to push our pawns essentially freely without having to worry about too much. And I think this is precisely why black has largely stopped playing the Old Steinitz variations, at least at the top level, because it's so uncomfortable, because whatever you choose to do, you're going to be hit with this quick attack on the king side. And this is why, if we take a quick step back, instead of d6, black first goes a6 usually. This is a better version of this d6 line, because here we can't play d4, because there's this common trap where they're going to be able to take, and then they're going to, if we take the knight here, they're going to be able to win a piece. This is known as the Noah's Ark trap. So we're going to need a different way to play against these a6 lines, and this will be in the next chapter. I'll show you. We're essentially going to do the next best thing. We're going to start with c3 and then go d4. But essentially, I'm putting this in the video just to show you that this is the improved version. If they want to play for these more passive setups with d6, they should first throw in a6, because as you just saw, if they play d6, we play d4, we have this ability to strike, and then in all of the resulting positions, no matter what they do, we're going to get a very dominant position in the center, which will enable us to attack very freely on the king side. Hopefully, this video made sense. There is a PGN file, of course, attached if you want to look through some of the games and the lines on your own and review them. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you're new around here, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.